I'm Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Worker Being Podcast. Today, Patricia has an article for us, and I'd love to hear a little bit about the topic, the day, before we jump into our conversation.
Yeah, so the topic of the day is pregnancy discrimination and the impact it has on mother and baby health. So it's a kind of a sad article, but important to know, and maybe we can stop being jerks and discriminating against pregnant people.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important topic, and even though it is, it stinks that so much that this happens and we need to think about solutions, we can't come up with those solutions unless we recognize and understand the problem. So it's really important to name the problem and be able to talk about the problem so we can find a solution. So I'm really glad that you picked this topic, and I haven't really seen a lot of research on pregnancy discrimination. So I'm really excited to know that folks are doing more work in this space as well, so that we can do that, so that we can start having the conversation.
Totally. It hasn't been a huge research area, just looking at some of the literature review that they did, but I'm hoping that we can talk more about this and make an impact. And I know we had what was that, back when Allie Gabriel spoke with us about nursing mothers. Yep. So there's a lot of research that's starting to be done more in this space. And I think it's really important. And maybe it's a generational thing, right? Now we have a bunch of younger women that are doing research that really care about this topic that maybe would have been shunned before. So yay for those women that are coming in, and women, men, whoever's involved. I know there's not just women doing this research, but for the people that are being involved in this now, I really appreciate them.
Yeah, and there's also more women associate editors, and the Journal of Applied Psychology has a female editor for the first time in its 100 something year history. JAP never had a female editor before, and now they have their first female editor in Lillian Eby.
Well,
and
that's where this is published.
Yes, and there are a lot more people on the editorial board and serving as associate editors who are women, and a lot more people who study diversity that are being put in positions of decision-making power about whether or not articles like this get a shot. And I can say from experience that the reviewers that you get when you're studying topics that are, even though pregnancy discrimination shouldn't be controversial, some people might think it is, right? And, or the topics that we study around LGBT populations, you can get reviewers that have adverse reactions to your paper because they don't like the topic in a way that's different from just writing a paper on like leadership, or writing a paper on, stress at work, or, something more benign that people don't see as like a politicized topic. So it matters a lot who is likely to get asked to review. So having diversity on editorial boards is important. And then it matters a lot who's in charge of culling those reviews and making the call about whether or not to give the paper a chance, because sometimes you get, one positive review and two negative reviews, or two negative reviews and one positive review. And the AE has to make that decision about which way to lean. And if you're already negatively predisposed towards a topic, or just don't think it's important, like, who cares about breastfeeding because I've never thought about breastfeeding and I think it's fringy or whatever, then you might lean towards a more negative review. And that paper won't get a chance to get published because it's not given a fair shot. So I'm really excited to see a lot of women filling out these positions, because I do think that it's impacting the likelihood that people will see these topics as important, and that, changes the way people view the paper in general, whether or not it's making a contribution.
Totally. It does make a difference. I mean, everything we've talked about with diversity and inclusion initiatives and the importance of representation, I mean, it obviously applies here. It applies in the space of research and reviewing research projects in terms of journal articles and publications. Like, the whole point is for us to do really good peer-reviewed research. But if peers don't want to review the research in certain topic areas, that makes a major problem and a huge roadblock. So yeah, it's super exciting to see more of this work coming through and being published, more people that are of a variety of backgrounds in these editorial staff and reviewer staff as well. So I think that's super important, and I'm excited to share this article that we can dive into a topic that's maybe a little less explored.
Yes. And one other thing that I'll say that's really awesome that Lillian is doing at Journal of Applied Psychology is that she mentioned that people who are serving in leadership roles, like associate editors and people on the editorial board, are likely going to have to go through some form of diversity training.
Oh, wow.
So that they can recognize their own biases in the way that they write reviews or write up decision letters. And I'm super excited about that because, and I'm sure if we talk to people that study pregnancy or breastfeeding or things like that, they'll have similar stories. But in the LGBT literature, like we've literally gotten people reviewers who have said like, well, who really cares? Like, isn't it only like 12% of the population that identifies as LGBT? So why do we really need articles about this? Why don't we have articles about the other 88% of the population? It's like, because that's literally every other article. Like,
yeah.
So like then 12% of our articles should be about that. Right. Like, but they like say that. And if the AE is not amenable, that can become a comment that can sink a paper, and it shouldn't be. Because it's ridiculous. But so I'm really excited that also there's like more of an eye for that people are going to be kind of held accountable for ensuring that they're not rejecting papers based on just like a negative reaction to the topic, but nothing to do with the rigor or importance of the research. So anyway, I know that that's long, but I am very excited about it because I think it impacts a lot of what we do, because we always summarize published articles, but there are tons of articles that never get published for a variety of reasons, sometimes for good reasons, but sometimes papers that are out of the mainstream never get published because people don't view them as important, even though they are. I'll say one more thing about that because maybe people are interested, but the very first paper on women leaders was rejected in the 1970s, was rejected from every journal that it got sent to. And it finally got published. But it got rejected from the first three places that Virginia Shine is the woman that wrote it. It got rejected from the first three places. And the feedback was, no, who really cares about women in leadership? There aren't that many women leaders. I don't think that there's any reason to think that women leaders would be perceived differently than male leaders. And it was just totally like, no, this is not interesting. This is not important. And I don't think it's a real thing. And it spawned an entire, like, think of how many articles we've looked at on gender and leadership or gender in the workplace. That was the first one.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of like, it took 4 tries for someone to say, oh, maybe this is something that could be interesting.
That is, I had not heard that story, and that is absurd. And we still know that representation isn't great for women in leadership, right? It's getting better over time, slowly, but not where it should be. And the idea that, well, because they're not there, we shouldn't study it is ridiculous to me. It's like, well, but maybe they're not there because of something. There might be a reason why. Like, that's so annoying.
The paper was literally about how adjectives that people use to describe leaders align with adjectives that people use to describe men, and not with adjectives that people use to describe women. And so when people try to pick leaders, they look for someone that has all these adjectives, but those are not adjectives that people associate with women. And so they're less likely to be picked into leadership roles because people have this idea in their head of what a leader's supposed to be. And actually those adjectives, as it turns out, don't actually end up adding up to what makes the best leader. It's actually like a mixture of the male and female adjectives together that make a good leader. So it's just like interesting that she was trying to raise a point of why women weren't in leadership roles. And they were like, oh, you know what? This isn't important because there aren't any women in leadership roles. Like, yeah, we know. That's why. So anyway, but I'm just happy that more of this research is coming out. And I think it's a direct result of having more women represented on these boards, but also having more people on the boards who are interested in these topics and willing to like take the time to recognize how their life experiences might inform their reactions to papers, and actually like learning from that and trying to overcome some of those things hopefully will help.
Totally. Yeah. I think you're right. I think it is a direct result. So anyways, it's super exciting.
Yay.
Love the topic, and I'm
Yay.
excited to dive into it.
Yes, me too. Just quickly before we get into it, how are you doing?
Doing all right. So I've been like bracing myself all day on, telling those of you that have been listening and caring about my journey with Nittany and her illness. We did lose her a few weeks ago. So, every day is getting better, but it's been sad in our house.
And for everyone who's listening, if you would like to send some words of encouragement to Patricia, I know she would love to hear from you too. So, if anyone's listening and, has ever had this experience or anything like that, we'd love to hear some words of encouragement. I know we always are trying to provide words of encouragement for people and to promote wellness and, talk about emotion management and all of that kind of stuff. But it's impossible to avoid hard times in your life. And we have to do the same thing for ourselves too. So this has been a really tough time. And, obviously our all of our best vibes and good wishes for you and Danny, obviously. But, if anyone else out there wants to send along a word of encouragement, I know that would also be appreciated because we all need it, even people who are experts on workplace wellness.
Oh, now you're making me cry. Yeah, our little baby girl, so for those of you that haven't heard an episode, Nittany was our cat that I got in grad school, and she was my little baby. But thank you for that, and sorry for the sniffle into the mic.
No.
Yeah, it's been rough, but we're working on it. We're getting through it, and I appreciate your words and your incredible flexibility during this time too. So I really appreciate that.
Losing a pet is one of the hardest things ever. And it's just like it's a really tough time when it's happening. And it also like continues being hard for a while, like I think just like with any like passing of anybody that's important to you, a pet is an important part of your life. And I think a lot of times people feel like it when, you lose someone or an animal that's important to you, it's kind of like people expect that for a couple days you'll be sad and then you'll just be like over it. And I feel like it takes a long time to heal from these things and to like feel better. And I know even when my mom and dad lost their pet, our dog that was around since I was in high school, someone had suggested that I get like a painting of a picture of our dog for my mom for Christmas after he had already passed for like almost a year. And my dad was like, I don't think that would be a good present. I think that would actually be really sad. I think there still needs to be like more time. And that was a year later,
Yeah.
So I think it's just like a really hard thing that is always a little bit sad, and never really like goes away completely. But, I'm here for you, and our hive, I'm sure, is here for you too. And, maybe it's helpful for people out there to also recognize that sometimes the experts in wellness also need a little nudge from the universe too to feel their best.
A little love. Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you though. I think it is very like time makes it easier. I don't think time makes any of it go away, right? And like, I know I've heard a lot of people that have had losses from, a wide variety of losses, whether pets, family members, what have you. That seems to be a theme across the board.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're doing okay. And I know we'll just get a little bit better each time, but hey, like when we bring up my cat from when I was a kid growing up and like thinking about some of those moments, I still get emotional, and I think that's going to be the case I'm also an extremely emotional person, so there's that, but I think that's just normal. So yeah, trying to get through it. Gonna take deep breaths now so that I'm not like crying when we're talking about this article, but and ask you how you're doing, and hopefully it's a little bit of
Yeah.
a lighter note.
No worries. I think it's good for I think it's good to have the full gamut of emotions. You know, that folks can see that we have them too. So I think that's, don't feel bad. Don't feel like you have to apologize. But yes, I'm doing fine. Actually, everything is like completely just like a normal week for me. I just got back from my first like work adjacent trip in Atlanta. So got back from there. Oh my God, what day of the week is it? I got back from there 2 days ago. And it was hot down there. Very, very warm. But I, you know, we got a lot of work done, but then also ate really good food. And we walked 50 miles.
That's so
during our
much.
trip, which is so crazy.
So much.
I know, because we were staying in this like Airbnb type like condo thing that was like about 2 miles from like the center of the town. So every time we went for dinner or back, we were always walking like 4 miles. And it was hot and like hilly and whatever. So anyway, I was like, I can't believe that we walked 50 miles, but we did. Which was kind of, I mean, my feet hurt really bad every day. And now I realize why.
Yeah, totally. Well, but you're a champion. I mean, in that heat too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I would have given up at some point.
Yeah. We were like, our feet hurt. I feel like we're getting old. And then I was like, check your iPhone and see how many miles we've walked. And we were like, what the hell? We were like, we've walked 50 miles. No wonder our feet hurt. Like we walked a lot. But so it was a good trip, very active trip, and happy to be back, but also had a good time. So that's basically it. That's in a nutshell what happened.
Yeah, but traveling
anyway,
again, which is fun.
Yes, I know. The first trip back out there and in the traveling game.
Yeah.
But anyway, we should kick into the article. So
yes,
can you tell us what the article is, like who wrote it, the title and all that, and then like kind of give us the high level of what's going on?
Yeah, for sure. So the article is called Examining the Effects of Perceived Pregnancy Discrimination on Mother and Baby Health. And it's a bunch of authors, so hey, bear with me as I probably butcher names as always, but I apologize to all the authors. Your work is great. So it's written by Hackney, Daniels, Paustein, Underdaw, Paraway, Mandeville, and Eaton. And it was published officially this year. It was online in 2020, but the article was officially published this year in 2021 in the Journal of Applied Psychology. So as we talked about, this is the journal where we've got a lot of female leadership now, which is great. And it's actually published as a research report, which means it's a little bit of a shorter, more streamlined article in some ways for us to talk through.
Cool. And I know Sam and Asia that are on this paper, and they're both fantastic. And actually, I'm starting to work on a project with Sam, Paustein, Underdahl soon. So.
Well, there you go. And that's how you say the name. So there you go.
Yeah. So go ahead. What's the kind of kick us off here?
Yeah. So this article, there were 2 studies within the article about perceptions of pregnancy discrimination and then how it impacts a couple of different health measures. So just kind of in their literature review, just to kind of give you a high level overview of what they were talking about. They were talking about how there's a number of studies that have suggested that a lot of women are worried about pregnancy discrimination, and that they're right in being worried about it, because there's actually, they listed there were over 50,000 pregnancy discrimination claims that were filed with the EEOC and the Fair Employment Practices Agency in the past decade.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's quite a lot. So it's happening a lot. People are feeling it a lot. They're claiming, I mean, if you're filing a claim, like, that means all the other options are away from you, right? You haven't been able to work through it with HR. There's a problem, and you're going to the government to help. And so that's really disappointing to see that humongous number. And so to define pregnancy discrimination, it's basically defined as by the EEOC in the U.S. as unfavorable treatment of women at work due to pregnancy, childbirth, or medical conditions related to pregnancy or childbirth. So it's pretty broad. Unfavorable treatment can probably be interpreted in a lot of ways, but it's basically just when they're talking about it a little bit more and like how they measure these types of things. It's things like hostile behaviors, like being isolated socially, people applying negative stereotypes, people being rude or negative, things like that.
Okay, gotcha. So it's not necessarily like I didn't get hired or I lost my job or something like that. It's more like incivility type behaviors that they're looking at.
Yes. So in this study, that's what they're looking at. But it's also all self-reported. So I'm sure that there are some of these behaviors, the discrimination behaviors that are filed in terms of EEOC complaints. There probably are things like that where people aren't getting jobs or what have you.
Sure, that makes sense. So the context is that there seem to be a lot of issues around mistreatment in pregnancies. Some of those may be around hiring, firing, lack of promotion. Others may be hostile work environment. But in their specific study, what they're looking at is how they're defining discrimination is more of these like interpersonal behaviors and less like structural.
Yep. Yeah. Like perceived prejudice, perceived discrimination, things like that.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah. So this study also, just kind of as for context, in addition to what I just described, there's a lot of medical research, as you can imagine, that indicates that maternal health is impacted by stress. So stress during pregnancy can often have some negative health consequences for the mother and also leads to poor outcomes for the baby. So there's already research on that, on just stress in general, having an impact on mothers and babies. And I will also, just as a caveat to for everyone listening, the studies here are pretty much just looking at pregnant women. So want to make that super clear too, that there's obviously a miss here in terms of when we think about representation, right?
Right.
It's not only women are pregnant, but in this case, all the studies here are about pregnant women.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So when people experience this discrimination, you mentioned that there's an impact of stress on health. What are the sorts of outcomes that they're interested in this study as they're looking at what I'm guessing they're thinking of as a form of stress, which would be experiencing pregnancy-related discrimination at work?
Yeah, so exactly. Pregnancy discrimination would be considered the stressor, something that's obviously creating a negative environment, negative treatment for the person in work that would lead to stress. So what they did is they actually measured perceived pregnancy discrimination, which included questions like prejudice towards pregnant workers exists where I work, perceived stress. So in the last month, how often you felt nervous or stressed. They asked a number of questions about that. And then, so those are the two things they asked first. So in study 2 is probably the more robust study. So I'll just kind of talk about that one more. They had a first survey that talked about pregnancy discrimination. So that's all they asked them, and like demographics and all that kind of stuff. The second survey was about perceived stress. And then the third survey was actually after the baby was born. And in that area, they asked them about postpartum depressive symptoms. They asked about the APGAR score, which I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that because it didn't turn out as anything, mostly because there was very little data because people didn't remember their APGAR scores for their babies.
Gotcha.
But basically that's a score that has it's a numeric score that physicians provide that give an assessment of the newborn's health. But most people didn't know that. So kind of not helpful for the study. Yeah. But then they looked at gestational age. So how many weeks pregnant was the mother when she delivered the baby, birth weight, and then the number of doctor visits. So how many times does a person have to bring their baby into the doctor in the first 2 weeks after birth?
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. So that sounds good. So they're looking at these health-related outcomes as a function of stress. that stems from these discriminatory experiences.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome.
So
Okay, cool.
pretty straightforward findings. Basically everything worked the way you would expect it to. So women that experience pregnancy discrimination have more perceived stress, and then that stress leads to more symptoms of postpartum depression. It leads to giving birth at an earlier gestational age. It led to lower birth rate and more doctor visits for the baby.
Wow. Did they that I mean that's really, really interesting, those health outcomes. And we don't often see biological health outcomes measured as much in our literature. So I really think that that's cool that they gathered that data.
Mm-hmm.
Did they control for negative affect by chance?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't remember them doing that.
They may not have, but I'm just curious, like, if it's because you could, I guess, make the case that, like, oh, someone's like generally in a bad mood, so they're going to perceive more bad stuff, and then that's going to make them more stressed. You know what I mean? Like, I was just wondering about that.
Yeah.
Not that I think that that's what's driving it, but I was just curious if they like looked at the effects over someone's like general disposition towards feeling more negatively.
No, they didn't have that, but they did have a lot of things they looked at. So they looked at like how old the person was that gave birth, how long they've been in their organization, how like their average hours on the job, if they're married, their race, education level, job levels. So like non-manager versus like a senior leader.
Gotcha.
Income, other children that they might have. So they looked at all of those other factors.
They controlled for a ton of stuff that would impact stress already.
Yep.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I think that this is really fascinating because, you know, when people mistreat people at work, first of all, when you're mistreating someone, you're not really taking the other person's perspective anyway. But I don't think that people would really ever make that connection that you're not just harming the person, but you're actually harming a baby. And like, I think that that's actually really important to say, like, okay, this is a stressor for this person if I'm acting this way. And it's not just something that's affecting one person. It's something that's also affecting two people. You know what I mean? Like, ultimately it ends up affecting two people. So I don't think that people would really think that or be aware of that and make that connection. And it's obviously extremely important because it's like a double impact of this negative behavior.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really important. And like, I wish that maybe just discriminating against the woman that is pregnant is bad enough. But if that can't convince you to stop being a jerk, like, think about the baby. You know, like, let's try to think bigger picture here. And we did talk about research before about like helping behaviors. I don't know if you remember that article.
Yeah. Yep.
Like how when you help pregnant women in the workplace, how are you helping them? And is it actually perceived as a good thing? Because sometimes we're condescending and we act like they're not competent anymore and things like that. So it's kind of the same thing, right? Like, sometimes there's ways that people are treated. Maybe they're isolated from things because they're pregnant and people think they're doing a good thing, but they're still discriminating against them, right? So I think we need to be really careful as to how we're treating people, regardless of their situation in life at the moment, right? There's no reason why women that are you know, with child, but pregnant, I don't know why I'm having a hard time saying that, but pregnant women
are about to bear life.
But there's no reason why we should be treating them any differently than we were treating them the month before they got pregnant. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
And I think if you create a more inclusive environment for women and, you know, and around gender in general, and for, you know, discussing pregnancy and make it just more inclusive and overall, you know, the idea would be that you assume that the person is able to do their functions of their job And then hopefully if there was some issue or problem where they were feeling uncomfortable or, they did need a different chair or something, that you would have an environment where the person could bring that up to you. So instead of making an assumption like, oh, let me do this or let me do that, or let's not talk to this person about this, or they probably don't want to be bothered with this, that you could just have an open dialogue and know that if the person really does need some kind of an accommodation, that they'll just tell you and then you can make that accommodation, but like not presupposing that a person like can't do anything because they're pregnant, and that stresses them out more because it in this instance might be perceived as, hey, I'm being treated differently and negatively because I'm being kept from things or being kept from opportunities or information. So that's problematic.
Totally. I think that's a good point, and it's actually one I literally wrote down.
Oh,
my takeaway.
awesome.
I was like, we need to be making safe spaces for open dialogue. So that's exactly what I was thinking about as I was reading this too. It's, you don't want to make an assumption on how the person is feeling, what they need, what has changed. You can be there for support. You can even say like, let me know how to support you during your pregnancy. Right. You don't have to like hide and not talk about pregnancy, but you just need to be able to keep it open and allow the employee to come to you if you're a leader and get the help they need versus you assuming they need more help than they maybe did before. So I think that's really important. Same with team members, don't assume anything there, right? I think sometimes people will like take on more work themselves because they don't want to put on somebody else, but don't do that. Like let that person have the workload they normally had and then decide if they need help somewhere, right? Like let them make that decision. I'm definitely going to link to that study about helping pregnant coworkers because I think it's super relevant here. But the other thing, too, is we need to think as organizations on how we can make sure that our leaders are understanding how to support pregnant people at work. So I know we do a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings with a lot of organizations are doing them right now. This could be a part of it. Like I feel like we don't talk about it in those types of trainings.
True.
And we talk about like gender broadly, but we don't talk about, pregnancy and how that ties into all the different areas. So I think that that's something that's kind of missing and maybe we need to be talking about more. I mean, maybe you and I should be implementing it as we're doing training too.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really easy to, well, it's only a period of time. So people just kind of don't think about it, right? But it is an important period of time that can have a big impact. And usually when people come back to work, they might still be breastfeeding. There might be other things still, obviously there's now a new member of the family that they're taking care of. There's like all these other things. So it doesn't really go away as soon as birth happens, right? There's still other things that might kind of continue from a discrimination perspective. So I think we need to be thinking about how we're training people to support mothers and pregnant women and pregnant people in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it really does fall under the diversity umbrella. But I really haven't seen trainings that cover that. I see trainings that cover like legal trainings for HR that cover like Pregnancy Discrimination Act and things like that. But I don't see that as something, as a topic that gets covered more informally of, what are some of the assumptions that people make. There's content like that. And this because we've delivered this content, but content like that around individuals with disabilities that, the research shows people tend to talk to people that have disabilities with, in like a babyish tone. They make assumptions about what they can and can't do that are erroneous. They see them as like weaker or less capable. So some of these same assumptions that the research shows people make about individuals with disabilities that we do sometimes talk about in diversity training are also relevant in the context of being pregnant. And so I think that that's a really good call out that we should be incorporating some of those things into the diversity training in a similar way that, someone's body may be changing or, there may be physical differences between what they used to look like and what they look like now. But that doesn't mean that their mind is any different or their capabilities have changed.
Exactly. Yeah. As I was reading it, I was like, we probably need to add this. So it's like, note to self, sure. Time to add this for sure. So I think that's also really important. And then the final thing, just thinking about that 50,000 cases number is really, really huge. And it also is super disappointing because not only does that mean that discrimination's happening a lot, because it's happening more than those 50,000 cases, of course, but it also means that systems within businesses are failing to address that. So that makes me really sad. And I was like, we need to be thinking, any HR leaders that are listening, like, how can we create effective reporting mechanisms that actually drive change and resolve the issue so that we're not adding more stress to the pregnant people? Because if they're coming in and they're reporting something and there's like this huge process, if they're going to the EEOC, odds are baby's born like before anything gets resolved, right? So then now you've added the stress is just compiled and is continuing postpartum, and now we're just making this problem even longer. So we need mechanisms within HR to like actually address the situation quickly, swiftly, and then let the pregnant person have a better pregnancy so that some of these outcomes don't happen.
Totally. That makes perfect sense. I think that is really, really good takeaway. And just, in addition to, creating this environment to create a structure that really supports and undergirds being more inclusive is important, because that will provoke those positive interpersonal behaviors.
Yeah, they would. They totally would, having that structure in place. So anyways, those are the things I was thinking about for takeaways. I don't know if there's anything else that came to your mind, but I think those are the key ones.
No, I think that's awesome. And I really hope that, organizational leaders are listening to this and start to think about both structurally and interpersonally how they're supporting an inclusive environment for, pregnant individuals in the workplace. And also that, if you are listening to this and this never occurred to you, because you have never been pregnant, and haven't really, thought about what assumptions you might have about individuals who are pregnant, this would be a really, good self-reflection, and thinking about what the assumptions are that you're making. And I thought you had a really good way of saying it before, that you can say, let me know what I can do to support you, but not making assumptions about how people need to be supported. And also not proactively behaving hostilely, obviously, is a positive takeaway. So really seeing yourself with clarity and thinking about how your past behaviors have been and committing to doing better.
Agreed. And I think the self-awareness piece, I mean, don't feel bad about it either, right? Like, obviously, if you were a jerk, I'm going to let you feel bad about that. But if it was something benevolent, like, take this as a learning and takeaway. I mean, we just talked about how we need to add this into our diversity trainings that we're running. So I think it's totally reasonable to, as we always talk about when we talk about bias, it's totally reasonable and fair that you may not have noticed that you had these biases. But now that we're making you aware, think about it and fix it. That's all we're asking. Make it better now. So
I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful takeaway and a great way to wrap this up. And I'm so glad that you brought up this topic, because we can't, solve issues around mistreatment of others unless we recognize that it is an issue. And so I'm glad that you raised this, and that hopefully it starts a dialogue within our hive to that effect.
Agreed. Well, thank you all for listening. As always, we'd love to hear your stories. Hope you don't have any discrimination stories if you have been pregnant in the past, but if you have, please feel free to share them. We're happy to support you too. If you're navigating this today or might be in the future and want to talk, always here to hear your stories, and would love to see what you've been facing and experiencing as well. You can always reach us on our email at contact@workerbeing.com. You can find us on our website, workerbeing.com, and best interactions are on social media. So you can find us at Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at workerbeing. And as always, subscribe, share, and review the show. Thanks for listening. The Worker Being podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabarek
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.